2011 saw the creation of Madoka Magica, an 11-episode anime series which completely deconstructs the magical girl genre. Animated by Shaft with an amazing OST, Madoka Magica is my favorite anime, with the third movie, Rebellion, being the best anime movie that I have seen. Rebellion follows the perspective of one of the major characters within the anime series, Akemi Homura. In this video essay, I will be diving into her character and trying to explain why I believe she's one of the best characters that I have ever seen. Trying to defy her fate, Homura is somebody whose deterministic lifestyle was on full display within the anime. She went through timeline after timeline to fulfill a promise that she made to Madoka. She wanted to save her from becoming a magical girl, to save her from despair. But the more she tried, the more fate played both into Homura and Madoka. The more she tried to save Madoka from becoming a magical girl, the more the universe made sure that Madoka would become one. And through all that, Homura understood that if she fell into her own despair, everything would change. She would become a witch. In every timeline, what is the thing that kept Homura sane? She was essentially a stranger, living to fulfill a duty, a promise to a being that didn't even exist. And when Madoka chose her decision, Homura was once again left alone, isolated. Within every timeline, her existence is continually erased and started again. No one has any memory of who Akemi Homura even is. So who or what is Homura? What is her identity? If she isn't saving Madoka, what is the point of Homura's reality? Rebellion begins with the talk of witches and magical girls as the scene is wrapped in complete darkness, but the origin being a bright purple light, indicating the beginning of their existence, and maybe even foreshadowing Homura starting a new universe through the usage of purple. The duality of magical girls is presented within the scene as well, with curses and hope, and light and darkness being ever present within their life. Afterwards, you're shown the light that formed the soul of a magical girl, their essence. The price that must be paid in order to perform a miracle is an eternal fight within themselves to not fall into despair as they continued their flawed reality. Within the soul of a magical girl, there is nothing but complete and utter oblivion. A void, born from her own destiny and her inability to change anything about it. Is Homura's tale one of salvation? Is it one of tragedy? Continually drowning in a sea of loneliness, despair, and her own self-hatred, Homura's desire to escape her reality after Madoka's wish is hinted at right here, and even shown as a downward spiral. Homura tries so actively to escape the destiny that she is bound to, but is ultimately dragged down by the red strings of fate every time. While the flashes of light remind Homura of her purpose and her reason to continue living within this eternal loop, her perspective on the world is completely broken. She finds it completely irredeemable as it has never once given her mercy. Time and time again, she's always been beaten by her destiny. She's always succumbed to the rules of time, to the rules of the universe. Her inadvertent failure was a result of her own feeble attempts to save Madoka. With every timeline that she tried to save her, she made Madoka stronger and stronger. She, who wanted Madoka to be completely powerless, gave Madoka the power to eradicate every witch in existence. And that is her tragedy. The world itself hates what Homura is trying to do. While time is her ally, it is also the same weapon that doomed her. Despite everything she tried, the cycle always completed. The universe struck balance within itself, and it was always at the defeat of Homura. So how else would the world look like to Homura? What else is there worth saving? Yet, she still dreams of beating that smile again. She dreams of meeting her hope. Homura's soul has faded completely from the screen, and it's still within her will to want to meet Madoka again. And as those flashes turn to black, and her soul is again lost to nothingness, if she can't meet up with Madoka, what is the purpose of her existence? Ballerinas are seen as beautiful and perfect, kind of like the role of magical girls. The curse on the left can be seen as their impending doom, forever present. The dancing of the ballerina could be representative of how they're always trying to fulfill their destiny, trying to fight for their lives while upholding a standard of being pure. Similar to ballerinas who are constantly in pain performing their dance, so are the state of magical girls who are continually defeating curses. Ballerinas' feet always hurt due to the strain of their dances, but they sacrifice their pain for the price of their performance. This mirrors the position of a magical girl really well, how they waltz face first into their desires, not noticing the price of it until the dance finishes. Because within every action, there is always a cost to being a magical girl. Within this scene, Homura is shown to be the only one who is not dancing in the background, as all the magical girls dance around her. It's dichotomous to her final waltz at the end of the movie, where she's left utterly alone dancing all by herself. Whereas within every timeline, all the witches banded together to try and fight the curses, Homura was always solemnly left alone, over and over and over again. Homura's final transformation is foreshadowed within the first 8 minutes of the movie, portraying her dormant nature and her unconscious desire to pull Madoka from the heavens. Within the magical girl introduction dance, Madoka's hand is shown reaching out towards a blank mirror, which then shatters as soon as she touches it. Again, this directly foreshadows Homura's rejection of Madoka as she finally escapes the labyrinth that she created herself. The shattering glass also represents Madoka's reality being broken by Homura's betrayal and her fragmented view on Homura. In another sense, it could also represent Homura's struggle of trying to continually reach out to Madoka and her inability to reach her from the other side. A mirror is supposed to be indicative of your soul, and the shattering of the glass could also simultaneously represent two other things. That within Homura's journey of trying to save Madoka, her soul was broken within the process, or it shows how Madoka was trying to enforce the law with which she created the universe, but then is ultimately rejected by Homura. Letting go of the red balloon in this moment is representative of Homura abandoning her innocence and starting to detach herself from the reality that she's presented with. Homura's journey is allegorical to completely losing herself to her own abyss. The entire world that she's been living in is crafted within her own unconscious, designed as a labyrinth to keep herself and Madoka ensnared. To continue within a falsified, idealistic dream, or to continue existing in a world without any form of purpose for existence. For who is Akemi Homura if she isn't trying to save Kaname Madoka? Typically, a full moon is also known as the time of harvest, or the time that a plan is coming into fruition, which could allude to Homura's unconscious will to completely bind Madoka to her labyrinth. Into the rhythm of time, Homura has been constantly battling it ever since she became a magical girl. Hung up within her own reality, set in her delusions, drowning in her emotions. Is Homura ever going to break free of the cycle she's entangled in? Will she ever reach any form of enlightenment? If Madoka is the light that guides humanity, and the magical girls, is it within Homura's will to create her own light? Or is it simply to reflect what Madoka sacrificed her life to do? Doomed to repeat life again and again, Homura was a being who was essentially immortal, attempting to change her reality to one she deems perfect. If Homura is bound to an eternity in suffering, which is again alluded to by the moon, would she ever reach her salvation? The images and ideas that are shown within a dream are often representative of the unconscious desire within your pure self. As Carl Jung says, dreams are impartial, spontaneous products of the unconscious psyche, outside the control of the will. They are pure nature. They show us the unvarnished natural truth and are therefore fitted, as nothing else is, to give us back an attitude that accords with our basic human nature when our consciousness has strayed too far from its foundations and run into an impasse. In this case, the entire reality that Homura has created within her unconscious is indicative of her nature to live with Madoka and the rest of the magical girls in ignorance. However, once she starts to regain her memories and gain consciousness of her situation, Homura begins to recede towards her older self. Unconsciously, Homura recognized that the manner in which she was living her life in a world without Madoka was too far from her foundation. But then, what exactly is Homura's foundation? Is it the first Homura, the person who had not yet done any form of time loops? Or perhaps it's the Homura whose essence is destined to be tied by trying to save Madoka over and over again? Or maybe it's the Homura who has failed to come to the realization that Madoka does not exist within this universe and that she has to carry on living by suffering in silence. This dream, this falsified reality, this disillusion shows teeth falling out, which symbolizes rebirth and a loss of reality. Homura's perfect dream is slowly falling apart. The existence that she created for herself and the other magical girls is collapsing in on itself. Homura's temporary escape within her dream served as a means of protecting her from her current self. This also foreshadows her witch form, which happens later in the movie with the soldiers in the background. The soldiers, which are here, are simply different forms of Homura, with each soldier representing the vast amount of times that Homura has looped and tried to defy fate. In essence, Homura also unconsciously views herself stranded within this role of a soldier, doomed to fight for eternity for a being who doesn't exist. Each soldier marks Homura's slow deterioration, visually represented by the formless nature of the soldiers. There's no sense of individuality. They're simply held together with one goal: save Kaname Madoka. Their purpose is for one being, Kaname Madoka. So fight, for what else is there for you to do? Fight, for succumbing to the everlasting despair will only serve to eat you up. Fight, for who else will? Fight for the girl who sacrificed everything. Fight for the sake of another day. Fight, for there may be another that needs your help. You fight because you do not know anything else. You fight because it has been too long for you to even remember anything else. So fight, Akemi Homura. You must always continue to fight. To simply wish for a moment independent of time, to simply wish for a life in which one can forget their suffering, is that truly a sin? Does a heart such as that deserve to be called a sinner? How would you define a sin in this lens anyways? Is it Homura, who just wants to spend more time with the people she loves the most? If witches are only meant to cause suffering and pain, is the witch who wished for more time truly evil? This point in the movie is pivotal in the mindset of Homura. Homura's belief that Madoka's decision to become a magical girl as a result of her own free will is shattered here. Madoka states that she'd never have the courage to leave Homura alone in a world without her existence. However, are these thoughts truly Madoka's? Or are they again a fabrication of what Homura wants them to be? Is this simply what Homura wants to hear at this moment? Is Homura also turning an ignorant eye to the fact that this Madoka is the one who's forgotten the experience that she went through to initially make that decision? For the Madoka who decides to make that choice, to eradicate witches, is not this Madoka here. Homura must understand this, as Homura was also someone different before she gained her memories. As such, Homura's disillusionment and her delusion continues to spiral, this time of her own doing, as she's convinced herself that these feelings are Madoka's true feelings. When the clock struck 12, which is also known as the witching hour, Homura's disillusion shattered. She finally came face to face with the truth that she had managed to avoid this entire time. That the one emotion she had spent her entire life fighting, the despair that served as the catalyst to Madoka making her decision, that same despair that resides within every magical girl, had finally managed to swallow her. Akemi Homura was no longer a magical girl. She had become a witch. This entire world had been created by her. She was the entity trapping Madoka in this labyrinth. It was Homura's doing. The motif of the full moon is also continually on display at the back, hinting at the fact that Homura had become that evil side of nature itself. Akemi Homura had failed. She had failed in her duty of trying to help Madoka. She had failed in trying to carry on without her. Homura, within her attempts to be a hero, had become that which she fought against. Homura, who simply wanted to save someone she loved, failed. Homura's name is comprised of the kanji for flame, which is shown visually through the entire fake city burning down. Homura couldn't bear to live with the false utopia that she herself created by falling victim to her own emotions. Drowning in the abyss, continually surrounded by the night, showcased by the moon, Homura is shown to be the one who is holding on to a fragments of a memory. Living through a conviction made to Madoka who doesn't even exist, is it Homura's fault for succumbing to her emotions? Living in a world created from her unconscious psyche, Homura's desire for the truth drove her to destroy the heaven that she herself created. Despite her wish to stay with Madoka in a place independent of time, Homura also wished to understand the truth. She simply couldn't handle the fact that she was truly happy. There had to be another reason for her happiness. There had to be another reason for her existence in this perceived utopia. Haunted by her own happiness, Homura strove to find what the truth may be, even if it would cause her pain. Every step she took in this movie was towards her own demise, whether she consciously knew it or not. The bus burning here is again indicative of every form of Homura, every different time loop that she witnessed, simply falling into her own hell, driving themselves further and further into their own abyss. There's a quote by Hannah Arendt that fits extremely well with Homura. The need of reason is not inspired by the quest for truth, but by the quest for meaning. In this case, was Homura's journey up to this point for a supposed truth? Or was it to find some form of purpose within her life? Is Homura's conviction to keep pushing towards an unobtainable reality giving her purpose? For a being who isn't remembered by anyone, for a being lost in time, is the belief in Madoka enough to give her own life meaning or purpose? Despite all this, even if Madoka's rival was Homura's essence, why did she seek to destroy it then? Why would Homura search for a truth if what she ultimately desired was already present in front of her? With all of these emotions, with all of these human feelings swirling around Homura, Kyubey then questions the very concept of human curiosity and human emotion, calling it completely illogical. Human nature very rarely makes sense if you factor in pure logic into the equation. Why does Homura continue to live, despite having every reason to die? What pushes her so? The reality of the situation lies in one simple fact. Logic will never be able to comprehend human emotion. While it may be able to communicate a small portion of it, the true nature of emotion is lost within language. Its true significance is lost to beings who rely purely on logic. Eyes are often regarded as the windows to your own soul, meant to showcase your inner essence. Homura's pupils are shown as two blood moons, an indication of a lunar eclipse. Lunar eclipse is when the moon is in Earth's shadow caused by the sun. So who is supposed to be the sun within this dynamic of Homura and Madoka? And who exactly is the sun shining down upon, casting the moon aside? Madoka prioritized everyone on Earth and was able to create a utopia for the magical girls. As a result, however, she ended up leaving Homura completely alone and isolated in a world without her existence. Homura was alone in the old timeline, and in a supposed heaven, she found herself abandoned yet again. Homura was cast aside for the sake of others when she cast everyone away for the sake of Madoka. In addition, accompanied with the line, "This is not the joy I wished for," it also adds the layer that she was deluding herself within her own falsified reality that Homura created. What is joy to the rest of the world, which was Madoka's hope, is Homura's own personal hell. What she thought might have been her perfect utopia, which is the fake city, that she unconsciously created, ended up becoming her own prison. So what is Homura's joy? When will this magical girl be happy? What sort of deception will she force upon herself just so she is able to keep pushing forward? What is the purpose of her existence if it isn't to be with Madoka? And if she is with Madoka, why isn't she innately satisfied? Is there even a joy that Homura can procure? The very fate that she sought to destroy overtook her being when she reached the truth. Akemi Homura, realizing that she was a witch and that she had been defeated by her own emotions, decided to go and die in the labyrinth that she herself created. Again, the motif of the moon bleeding and the different forms of Homura all crashing down indicate a few things. The moon, which is a symbol of eternity and love, is shown to be inherently bleeding from the despair that Homura is going through. The moon in this case is also a reflection of her own essence. One of the major aspects of rebellion is Homura's descent from heaven into hell, signifying a fallen angel, or Lucifer. So as all the different Homuras finally fall from grace and amalgamate into one being, the being known as Akemi Homura destroys herself. Each Homura, who had been kept separate and different, all now have form and are meshing together into one being. All of their loneliness, all of their anguish and desperation are now amassed into one form. Homura, who had kept every part separate in order to subconsciously save herself, has abandoned her reasoning. She is, and always has been, so very utterly alone. There will be no one who will be able to save her soul from her own despair. That is Akemi Homura's first enlightenment that she receives in this film. Homura's psyche of self-infliction is shown within the screenshot, with the other versions of Homura looking down upon her, almost as if to cast judgment on her inability to keep saving Madoka. Stuck in a loop of constantly abhorring herself, Homura places Madoka on a level higher than her own self. Homura's entire essence, her entire worth, is based on the idea of being able to save Kaname Madoka. And as a result, the Homura that was presented in the movie reaches into the depths of despair and dies as a magical girl. The glimmers of light are references to Madoka herself, and regret is one of the only emotions left from her time spent in the universe. For Akemi Homura, there's not much else to remember the world by, as it has given her nothing but anguish. It has given her an immovable fate, and she has succumbed. The universe, which was sprung anew from the laws of Madoka, which was born from the sacrifice of one magical girl, has given Homura absolutely nothing. Homura's rebirth as a witch comes full circle as the life of a magical girl. Doomed to fall victim to the cycle of hope and misery, magical girls are destined to one day become witches. As such, it's Homura's overwhelming despair with the first enlightenment that she succumbs to her own emotions. Homura's mouth being sewn shut is representative of her inability to communicate her true nature within any form of reality. Her fate essentially tied her to never being able to return to her original timeline, forced to go over and over in a pocket of time while never being able to connect with those around her. Evolving past her magical girl form, which is showcased by her bursting out of the cocoon, Homura's head is filled with red spider lily flowers, which are associated with goodbyes and death. In addition, the flowers are supposed to represent guiding the dead through samsara, the cycle of rebirth. In this case, Homura is saying goodbye to her love for Madoka with her death as a magical girl, hence Madoka being shut away behind locked doors. Homura's fatalistic mindset is portrayed through the red strings of fate, which are tied to a set of guillotine handcuffs, which are also inherently completely free. They're not tied to anything. It's Homura who believes that she's going to die and that she needs to suffer as a result. It's this form which has the falling teeth and the soldiers that were foreshadowed earlier in the movie, all indications of a loss of reality and self-control. It was only in this form was Homura finally able to truthfully communicate with the rest of the magical girls that she was completely grateful that they showed up. Homura, in her purest form, finally meets up with the goddess Madoka, who remembers everything. Within her pure form, Homura's essence, her soul, is finally honest. Stripped of any delusions, Homura has finally accepted each individual form as a necessity to her entire being. As a result, these wishes, these desires, are something that each version of Homura wants. And all she truly wanted was to be able to see Madoka again. All she ever wanted was to hold her hand again. The red spider lilies in the background are again indicative of yet another rebirth that Homura will go through, which is her final form in this movie. The tears being shown as pure white balls of light also display the purity and innocence of Homura's emotions. During this moment, Madoka descends from her heaven to save Homura, shouldering the despair of every magical girl in existence, creating a new universe where she imposes her will as the new cycle for magical girls. Homura's cry for help brings down this god to her own realm. And that was the moment that Homura was waiting for the entity known as Kaname Madoka to be brought down in front of her. As Madoka reaches towards her very soul gem, her very essence, she again offers an escape from the natural cycle that Homura is suffering in, the state of dukkha in terms of samsara, which is defined as the beginningless cycle of repeated birth, mundane existence, and death. But despite getting everything that she wished for, despite getting that miracle that she wanted, despite getting the validation of everything she was hoping for, despite finding that purpose she was supposedly striving for, Akemi Homura rejects everything. The pool of human emotions is vast. The depth of said emotions is even more so. What resides at the bottom of said emotions? What drives Akemi Homura in her actions? Why did Homura choose to stay in the cycle of suffering? Why did Homura decide to reject God? As her soul gem is supposed to be reflective of her essence, the distortion of the colors represent the interlacing of every emotion that Homura has kept repressed up to this point. Referencing my earlier point where I said the eyes are representative of your soul, in this case, Homura's eyes are reflecting a rapid change within her essence. she is overcoming the ascendancy of Kaname Madoka. Here, Homura is rebirthed with her second enlightenment. Forced to repeat her past, left all alone to suffer within timeline after timeline, how can anyone even begin to understand Homura's conviction? How can they begin to understand the agony that she's accumulated living through multiple realities? No one to rely on, no one to remember her suffering, stuck in a mundane existence while continually dying. Who can even begin to understand Homura? The fact remains, Homura is alone, has always been alone, and will continue to be alone. She will always be isolated. As such, the myriad of colors bursting through Homura seems absolutely inexplicable to everyone else. Is it desire? Insatiability? Selfishness? No one has an answer, for the emotion that is pouring out of Homura is unique. It is hers alone. There was one person who gave her a form of hope in the midst of all of her despair. Kaname Madoka was the being who gave her light in the sea of her desolate realities. As such, the connection that she formed with Madoka, the dependence that she forced onto her, was an emotion that was simply hers to bear. She grabs hold of Madoka and rejects her godhood. She rebels against the intentions of God and shatters their reality, warping and forming her own existence in the process. This is visually shown through the cracked glass screens and the separation of the god form of Madoka and her human form. She's able to establish her own existence while simultaneously denying the entire universe. Each crack, each broken attempt while fighting for Madoka has finally turned into reality. Swallowing her previous soul gem, Homura is crafting her own essence now. Her inner conflict has now become completely externalized and is the main driving force for rewriting the universe. This serves as a direct dichotomy to Madoka, who took all of the external suffering of the world and completely internalized it through her wish. Madoka's altruistic and selfless reasoning for wanting to rewrite reality are the antithesis of Homura's conviction. Homura's new soul gem also serves as the antithesis to Madoka's. The design of the snake is another reference to Lucifer. The purple overtones are symbolic of royalty, her new formed godhood, and the diamond on the top is supposed to represent strength and invincibility. However, there still resides a large portion of gray in the middle and at the top of the gem. This gray area is representative of the blind nature and denial of Homura. Shown with a background of yellow and splatters of blood in the back, Homer's belief that this is the correct reality is based on her own selfish ideologies. But then I have to ask, is she ever inherently wrong? Throughout the entire narrative of the anime, Homura is shown to be opposing Kyubei's wish of Madoka becoming a magical girl. As Madoka struggles with her decision of becoming an entity who wants to naively end the suffering of every magical girl, Homura is vehemently against this idea every time. Madoka's final choice is to sacrifice her existence for the sake of other magical girls, and by proxy, create a new universe in which she shoulders the despair and suffering of every magical girl in existence, whether that's the past or the future. There's another quote that I feel goes very well with Homura's situation in Rebellion, and that's, "What is done out of love takes place beyond good and evil." To the Homura in Rebellion, who tried to unconsciously create her utopia by luring Madoka in, who pulled God out of her heaven and dragged her to the abyss, who ended up sacrificing the universe for the sake of one person. To the girl who was eternally trapped in time, trying to save someone else over and over again, which action was deemed immoral? For is anything bound to love ever immoral? There's no act that is fundamentally immoral, only its interpretation of said act. Love transcends morality. It is neither good, it is neither bad, it simply is. Which is why love stands at the pinnacle of all human emotion for Homura. It was her love that drove Homura through each timeline. It was love that allowed Homura to shoulder any form of sin for the sake of Madoka. It was love that allowed Homura to suffer. It guided Homura. It fed her energy when she was down. It motivated her very essence to resist the nature of magical girls and witches and transcend all of it. Love is what gave meaning to Homura, and it was this love that is grander than anything else that the universe has granted her. Her love is what allowed her to pull God from heaven and override her will. Therefore, Homura's love is the apogee of humanity and is the only thing that will save Kaname Madoka from her fate. That is what Homura's second enlightenment is. The story of the fallen angel is one I have referenced earlier in this analysis. Homura's journey through rebellion is akin to Lucifer's journey. Lucifer was stated to be one of God's mightiest angels, leading the choir with his voice. He then began to grow envious as he desired a throne of his own, and this sense of envy and jealousy overtook him. So he betrayed the perfection of the kingdom of heaven and God and ignited a rebellion. This rebellion, however, did not work in his favor, as he ended up being cast aside out of the kingdom of heaven. Homura, who called herself the devil, otherwise known as Lucifer, also rejected Madoka's kingdom of heaven and ignited the rebellion against her. However, was this kingdom truly even perfect? In addition, didn't Homura cast herself out of said kingdom and create a brand new one? While similar to Lucifer, Homura's actions are never laced with ill intentions. Akemi Homura is never a being of pure malice. She never desired a throne of her own. She simply found no other option. Homura, once again creating her version of utopia, forces Madoka to live as a normal human being, fulfilling the promise that she won't let Madoka turn into a magical girl. Forced to forget her memories, Homura and Madoka are shown again as the complete antithesis of each other. While Madoka was the one who was previously in control of the cycle, this time around she is completely vulnerable. Whereas Madoka had become the idea of hope, Homura had become an entity she calls evil. While Madoka had come to accept the destiny that was bestowed upon her, Homura chose to continually fight it. So when they meet again in the school with Homura showing her around, while on the surface she's giving Madoka the life that she never experienced, these actions were all born from a selfish desire. Which is why when Madoka begins to have her existential crisis, Homura rushes in to hug her. What is seemingly an action of love is also an act of desperation. As Madoka's essence is pushing her towards her role, Homura is trying to make her forget. Homura is forcing her delusions not only on herself, but onto Madoka as well. The despair that she felt, the trauma she's been through. If the girl she saved can't live a normal life in the universe that she created, what was it all for? Tied through destiny and time, fighting against fate and the universe, is Homura's love truly evil? This love, which gave her life, is the same love that's binding her. Through all of this, Homura then begins to ask Madoka which she considers more important, stability and order, or her desires. Does she unconsciously want to keep that same order that she established earlier? Or perhaps her reintroduction into some form of normalcy would have changed her behavior? Was Homura able to give Madoka the life that Homura thought she desired? In the end, however, the universe was again unkind to Homura. Madoka's essence will always lead her to her own form of salvation. It was at that moment that Akemi Homura realized that she would be the villain to Madoka's story. It was at this moment that Homura realized that she'd be always fighting against Madoka. It was at this moment that Homura would come to realize that destiny would continue to play its part in their dynamic, regardless of who played God. And this was Akemi Homura's third enlightenment. Yet despite all of this, Homura ties the red ribbon in Madoka's hair, indicating their interlinked dynamic through the red strings of fate. She continues to wish for a world in which Madoka will finally be happy. Is that a proclamation of her love, or is it her spite? Is Madoka's own happiness something that Homura tried to once account for? Or is it a preconceived notion created by Homura's selfish desire? Passing through space, time, altering reality and perception itself, both Homura and Madoka have played God. They've both rewritten the natural laws of the universe, and yet they find themselves inexplicably tied in the same way that they met. No matter how hard they try and fight it, they just simply cannot win. And so Homura waltzes alone, the isolated ballerina. Through her 3 enlightenments, she has come to realize that there is no heaven in which she will be happy. The city which she was looking at just stares back at her, empty, devoid of life. Yet again, there is no one who knows of her existence. Becoming the god of this world, Homura now no longer seeks any form of truth, for there is none to find. Perhaps the third quarter moon behind Homura is indicative of the forgiveness which it represents. The soft, innocent snow falls upon the barren and dead landscape, an indication of the helplessness of Homura's decision to become that devil. As Homura stares into her gemstone, her essence, she smiles gently, before diving into the hell below. There is no death that awaits Akemi Homura, for there is no salvation that can be granted to her. There is no God here to come and save her. Defying her sense of mortality, abandoning her sense of morality, forming her identity on what she chose to believe, is Homura truly the embodiment of evil? Is she truly the antagonist of every magical girl? And is the cycle that she tried so hard to break from still dooming her? So drown in your despair, Akemi Homura. For what else can you do? What else can you salvage? What else can you save? What were you able to save? Did you do what you set out to accomplish? Face that darkness ahead of you and acknowledge that you have a love that can never be obtained. Fight, Akemi Homura, for what else is left for you to do? Will your love ever be actualized? Will your loneliness ever bear any form of fruit? Will you ever win, Akemi Homura? Will you get the life that you so desperately pled for? What did your life amount to? Was it worth it? Was it worth that suffering, Homura? Was it worth the agony? Was it worth the eternal torment to be placed into the darkness? And are you ever going to be able to let go? He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. Is your why enough, Homura? Are you able to bear through any how? Do you believe that you even deserve salvation? Akemi Homura, do you believe that you are worth it?